Oh, hi, sweet and holy friends. I'm so excited to be here with my dearest, wonderful sister in the world. Um, I wanted to just begin by welcoming you and for the love of goodness, the fact that you took time to be with us tonight. I'm just so grateful, and so is Val. I
Yeah,
wanted to speak
forwarding this
to,
to my page real quick as you say an intro there.
yes.
Hi, everyone.
So I wanted to get into just the title of our talk tonight. The the talk is, what is the work that we do now? And oh, I've got it. Thank you. I think I figured it out. Yeah, thanks. So love. So the one more kiss. One more kiss on the ear, right on the ear. So there was an article that really inspired me, and I have Ariel Gruber to thank for that. And it was an op-ed piece in the New York Times, and it was by David Brooks, and he highlighted four questions that were important questions to ask during the pandemic. Three of them he borrowed from Dr. Viktor Frankl, the man who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, or Human Search for Meaning, and he writes that number one is, it's important to figure out what is the work that we're doing now. Number two, what is the love that we give? Number three, what is the courage that we express? And number four, and this is the one that David added on, how do we interpret the story? How do we interpret the current narrative? And so I thought we would open up those questions and begin wherever you want. And I'm gonna ask you to begin.
Thank you. And thanks for opening with that, Mark. That's really beautiful, beautiful kind of gateway into the conversation. I feel it might be good to really look at how we're holding this moment. How are we seeing this moment? What is its meaning for us? I think that's a nice place to start. What do you think?
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, let's do that.
Yeah, I think it opens up to everything else. So let's see, where do we want to begin? Goodness. Obviously, there's so much that we're all holding right now in our world. This is a really unique moment to be alive. Never, obviously, in our lifetime, and I think in the history of the human species, have we experienced something quite like this. Not only just a global pandemic, we've had other pandemics, but in such a way where we have the technology to instantaneously pass the news around. So we hold this psychologically and emotionally, I think, in a different way, perhaps, than we ever have before. So it's really an interesting time to take a look at globally what's happening. So for me, my background is in deep ecology, and deep ecology is this philosophical and spiritual platform that invites us to ask the deeper questions about who we are as humans and how we relate to the world around us. And so when I look at what's happening right now and I sit in that inquiry, I look at, first of all, Earth as a living entity. So the Earth is alive. We're alive in a living world. And it's a living system, not in the same way that we are, self-reflective, but it's definitely a system that strives for balance and strives for some kind of homeostasis, the optimum conditions for life. So I see part of what's happening right now on an ecological level is this strive for balance. We have, I mean, gosh, before this pandemic, like we're in the midst of global climate change. We're in the midst of a mass extinction we haven't seen in 65 million years. We lose about 100 species a day. Our world is completely toxic, right? And so on so many levels, because we are interconnected with life and interdependent with life, what happens in our external world also affects our internal world. So now we have the sickness on the rise and cancers on the rise and the toxic bodies, right? The water we drink, the food we eat, the information we take in, the air we breathe, all of it becomes part of our inner ecology. Everything's interconnected. So we have this experience that's happening right now, and this system, this global system of Earth that's striving for some kind of balance because it's running away. It's out of control and it's unsustainable. And that which is unsustainable, by definition, cannot last. We cannot keep going on the way we're going. So on this kind of ecological and scientific level, I see this system striving for some kind of balance, right? There's so many humans on this planet, other species don't have habitat. Like there's just so much going on. So we see that happening on one level. On another level, on a more, let's say, mythopoetic level, I think that we see Earth inviting us to, like, life is inviting us to take a deep breath. We keep phrasing this like, well, gosh, like it's like the earth is taking this deep breath right now. And we're seeing clarity in the skies, and the waters in Venice, and the dolphins are returning, and the water's clear. They can actually see the fish for the first time. And it's like earth is taking this deep breath. And I think that life is really inviting us as a human species to take a pause, take a deep breath, because the only way we can actually have clarity in who we are and how we're showing up is to slow down and become deeply present to who we are and what's here and how we relate to our world. And so very much on that level, we're in our homes. Like we're in a pause. No matter what, we're in a pause. We're all having different experiences, but there is this invitation right now to slow down and say, what are we doing? Who are we? What is our work right now? What is our inner work right now? What is it like to be me in this moment with all of this happening that's, around me, inside of me, the people that I love? How is this breaking my heart open to a deeper sense of compassion? There's so much in this. There's so much here. So as far as what is the narrative of this moment, it's like there's the ecological narrative I see, and then I see this, really like poetic narrative of inviting us into this deeper self-inquiry and collective inquiry. So I'll put that out there to begin and take a pause.
You know, I've been thinking about the idea of distance in terms of poetry, right? If there's one word that's the key word for this particular unprecedented pandemic, it seems as though distance has become a friend, and it seems to be one of the only ironclad feels that this virus has passed from person to person, and so there's many different theories. None of the models seem to be really perfect, but this idea of distance seems to be an argument, and so it's not a word that I'm comfortable with, and I don't think that many people are. And we're in a community where we love to embrace, and we love to touch, and we love to hug, and nearness and closeness and intimacy define us. And you have fostered a similar community. And so I wanted to take the idea of distance, of empty space, of this new vast frontier, and sanctify it. And that's what I felt my work has been over the last month or so. And I thought it was, being that you are the warrior goddess of ecology, and that you are a leader in the field of psychospirituality, this is a perfect, something to toss around here. So I'm going to give you just some ideas that I've been flirting with. Number one is, there are two ways to get to know someone. And I think that the pandemic was not the beginning of social distance. I think social distancing is something that began as soon as it was easy for people to get work outside of their home. As soon as the nuclear family began to break down, and you have a mother who's working in St. Louis, and a father who's working remotely in Saudi Arabia, and children who are out of the house as soon as they can. And so there were many holidays before Passover and Easter where we weren't with our children, where we weren't with our families, where we weren't with each other. And because this is not a new enterprise, I've been thinking about how to create distance that also provides an intimacy. And the one thing that I came up with was there's this idea, and it's sort of a psycho-spiritual idea in the Jewish mystical realm. There are two ways of knowing someone. There's in Hebrew, it's panim bipanim, which means that you know someone intimately, like you know your sister, or you know your brother, or you know your father. You can almost guess what they're going to say, right? It's such an intimacy that you don't even have to hear the end of the sentence. You already assume that you know everything about them. And then there is panim el panim, which is I know I know enough about this person to know that I'm going to be surprised by them. You know, I know enough about them to know that I can't wait for them to thrill me with some new mystery. And that kind of intimacy is different. It's different than panim panim literally means knowing someone from the inside. Panim el panim means that I want to keep getting to know you better. So I'm going to create this space, right? This distance between us of sort of an unshared new frontier that we are exploring together. And so when I see the pandemic as a frontier, and as you've mentioned before, and as a renaissance,
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's it takes the narrative and spins it on its head a little bit.
Mm.
And in terms of intimacy, which is really what I feel people that your average person is feeling, mostly the compromise of intimacy, physical intimacy, and so on, that this gives them a new platform to be known, to know others, and to do so in a way that distance doesn't um, hinder, but rather it inspires. And I'll give you one last thing, and then I'll pitch it back to you. There's this idea that God. I hope it's okay for me to mention God. The atheists don't get upset. And you can, however you imagine God to be, is okay. Divine, or the universe, the universal love, is that the idea of the Jewish God is that God says, I want to get to know you not in a municipality that has been formed with streets and signs and exits. I want to get to the narrative of the Jewish narrative is in the desert. Like, we're desert people, right? The Semitics are people of the desert, right? So why would God create such a place to get to know us? Because it is blank, because it is frontier, because it is empty, because to know someone is to love someone. As a matter of fact, the word for know and love in Hebrew is the same word, right? And even in your biblical, whether you went to Sunday school or what, to know someone in the biblical sense means that I have created intimacy with them. So I'd like to explore the idea of distance as a sacred, um, both ecologically, geographically, that there's a distance geographically, but also the idea of distance in that we have been distant from each other for a while.
Mm.
And this is a new way to navigate the distance and create further intimacy in a way that we didn't before. Like someone who's right next to me, I'm not craving the kind of intimacy that I was. I haven't seen my father in a month and a half physically, right? So I'm really craving that connection in a way that I wasn't before. Although I love him, but I didn't call him 3 times a day, right? Neither did he call me. But now, all the time. And so I think there's something there. There's a lesson in intimacy. So I'll pitch it back to you, my sweet.
Yes, thank you. Um, I think intimacy is something that is so deeply present right now for all of us. And it's interesting to, yes, experiencing this distance as sacred. And because I feel like what we're cultivating is a deeper intimacy with ourselves. Some people are alone, literally completely alone. Some of us are we have our families, our core family with us. And no matter what our situation is, I feel like we're all coming face to face with ourselves in a unique way. So I think that life right now, like every moment, is just overflowing with an intimate connection, an intimate feeling. And there's kind of a longing for one another, which is another form of intimacy, right? There's just like this, missing that contact, but at the same time, experiencing a sort of a global like heartbreak, which is opening us to a deeper sense of compassion, which is another relationship with intimacy with one another, right? So some of us are in a situation where we're able to be in these conversations and in these contemplations, and some other people are wondering how they're going to feed their families tomorrow, right? So there's so many different experiences happening, and for those of us that are in, I would say, a relatively okay situation right now at the moment, how does that sit within us, within our hearts? You know, what are we called for when we think about the people that are having a much harder time in this moment? You know, and I feel like that also is a piece of what it means to be intimate with them,
Hmm.
feel a deeper sense of connection with them, with where maybe they weren't in our minds and hearts before, maybe on some level, but not as much as right now. We're really being faced with how are we all experiencing this right now. So I see intimacy coming through in so many different ways right now, you know, for ourselves, you know, really connecting to how am I holding this moment? You know, how are the waves of grief and sadness for our world moving through me? You know, how is the curiosity for what's next coming through me? You know, how am I contemplating my life? You know, and like with your father, like, or with my family too, like I haven't seen my mother, and how does it feel to feel them on another level, as you were sharing, you know, and then connecting with the entire world in this shared experience, I find to be quite intimate. So there's a lot of levels of intimacy, and it's making me think of this beautiful quote from David White, who's an incredible poet, mystic.
That's the book that you gave me, right?
Yeah, did you
I
ever read?
love it. I love it. Yes, I am. I am. I promise.
He says the only choice we have as we mature is how
The
we.
wait, speak a little louder. The only
The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance.
oh
And there's a lot, right? There's a lot of this sort of like literal and figurative
wait,
metaphor.
wait, repeat that last part. That's beautiful, Tara.
I'll repeat the
Repeat that
intimacy
last part.
because it's
That
very, very powerful. It stays with me a lot. It stayed with me through loss. I always come back to this quote. And obviously, we're all experiencing a lot of loss in our world right now. It's that in a sense, there's people that are dying, and there's also this death of a system. There's a lot of death energy, which is an invitation to rebirth, right? So we're sitting with this loss. So the quote is, the only choice we have as we mature. This is important, this idea of maturity, psychological and spiritual maturity. The only choice we have as we mature is how we inhabit our vulnerability, how we become larger and more courageous and more compassionate through our intimacy with disappearance.
you know, it's so funny. I've spent the better part of the last 4 years raising money for a building, for a sanctuary for our community, and it has in creating a building, what you're doing is you're inviting the community to congregate in one central location, right? And what I in that there's not a real consideration for the people who are shut in, or the people who can't afford gasoline, or the people who live, 6 states over, but who really connect with your message. And these are the people that um, that I find us reaching out to now that we wouldn't have otherwise. And it redefines what it means to be courageous
Mm.
and to be vulnerable and to be intimate, right? In terms of courage, I was imagining that courage would be, risking myself on a mortgage, risking our hard-earned savings and the temple's, earnings on a mortgage for a building. And I think the real courage here is not to say that we won't get a building, but the real courage here is to find and develop new ways of reaching out for those people who can't be in the building. And the building and the walls, and we've always been a temple without walls, right? To break down those walls, to reach out in ways that we wouldn't have if this pandemic hadn't confronted us in such a way. And so that piece really, it spoke to me. It's a beautiful piece.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And I think that's where, we a lot of conversations are happening right now around this, especially. And, this crisis has that flip side, right? It's like the crisis also has within it, built into it, there's an intelligence in this crisis. There's
Always, always.
intelligence in life right now that we're being offered. This is that opportunity. This is the gift, the blessing, and the experience. There's always one, right? Like in the most challenging moments of our lives, personally, we experience ourselves deeply. We experience who we are, our strengths, our gifts. Sometimes, the most challenging moments of our lives, those dark nights of the soul, are the ones that put us on our path, show us our path, illuminate who we are in the world. And I find very much on a global level right now, at both levels, on an individual level and also on a global level, we're invited to ask, what is my path? What does it mean to be me in this world right now? How is life inviting me to show up in both subtle and large ways in a new way? You were saying, how do we do this in a new way? That's
Mm.
sitting with me. Like, this is the question. How do we create a society that pulls these lessons in and is restructured, which may look like uprooting our habits and daily ways of being? It may look very different, which is so uncomfortable for the majority of people to think about change, think about uprooting their easy way of life, right? But right now, to consider ourselves is to consider the whole. We have to look at both. We have to look at both. And who am I, and who am I in the context of the larger world right now?
You brought up two concepts, and I want to explore them with you. Number one is the idea that there's an intelligence at work, and every every dilemma has an intelligence built into the framework of that dilemma. We have this understanding that it's kept me from tossing and turning late at night. It's this idea that kama refulamaka, that before there is any calamity, the remedy is already put into place. And so the intelligence of a dilemma uh, is it works in two ways. Number one, it beckons you to meet it, right?
Yes.
It's sort of the in the framework of the Jewish world, we refer to the world as olam, which means hidden. It comes from the Hebrew word ne'elam. So hidden within the framework, that's the lesson. We believe that life is a lesson, right? So what's the learning here? The intelligence is beckoning us to discover that learning. And I think that in terms of this being a renaissance or a frontier, is that it's really an invitation, as you say, an invitation to identify the intelligence of the moment. There's some perfection unfolding in the moment, and that's that's number one. Number two, you said that it's inviting us as well to to give us time, which we didn't have before, to create some personal um, introspection, personal improvement, and personal growth. Uh, Not to be redundant, improvement and growth are not always the same thing. And so the
Mark,
intelligence,
we're losing you a little bit. Say that again. The last thing
in
you.
terms of intelligence,
Mhm.
can you hear me all right? Should I move this a little closer? So, in terms of intelligence, what do you feel the intelligence unfolding now is? Because there are a few key signs, right? There's certain signs that are inviting us, peeking behind the landscape of the moment, and they're sort of encouraging us in a certain direction. What are some of those directions for you?
So, two questions then. What is the intelligence and what are the directions?
Yes, yes, yes.
Intelligence is like a whole another
Yeah.
hour long. No, but I
And
wanted,
especially with a theologian, you're going to get into a whole new insight.
and I am too, right? Of the mystery, I say.
Oh,
So I feel, people that have worked with me or know me or follow my work at all know that sometimes I say I'm an armchair cosmologist, like I am fascinated by the universe story, the story of our time, which tells us the story of evolution, right? from a speck tinier than a grain of sand, this great mystery. We don't even know what it is. Everything we can interpret and give meaning to gave birth to the universe and has been unfolding for 13.7 billion years. And in that process, in this process of unfolding, and this process of unfolding, life continues to learn. It continues to learn and grow and evolve. And it evolves fastest in crisis, by the way. Evolution happens under the greatest amount of pressure. And so here it is, right? 4.5 billion years ago, the earth was created, and then at some point, like the single cell, and that began to evolve into these, primates, and then the human, right? The self-reflexive human, the ability to have this insatiable curiosity to know ourselves and explore ourselves. And so when we ask, what is that intelligence? That intelligence is what we are. We are the intelligence of the universe. We are this mystery. We are this God. We are this is my belief, right? That what we are is this unique expression of the divine. And so what is this intelligence that's happening right now that's telling us to pause? And I think it's who we are. It's what we are. We are telling ourselves to pause. That life is saying, whoa, let's pause collectively, whatever virus, whatever this, it's all part of this divine. It's all part of it, and so are we. And so is this. And so it's like, we are saying, whoa, life to life, universe as Val, universe as Rabbi Marc, universe as whatever identity we take on, who we are. We're telling ourselves to slow down and see who you are, because we move so fast. Humans have been here for a blink of an eye, and technology is going out of control. Everything's going so fast. We've forgotten who we are. We have forgotten who we are, and so like, the thing that I love most is to have the conversation that helps us remember who we are on the deepest level. It's the same thing that you do. Who are we? We can't move so fast in life and be caught up in all the bling, bling, bling of life that we forget to be who we are. We don't even know who we are sometimes. We get lost in this everything, the overstimulated world that keeps getting more and more busy. Like the first thing that happened when all of this, I saw all of this fast forward motion, all of this productivity, and here's this invitation to pause, and then, well, let's just bring it online. Bam, explosion. I have talked to so many people, even my own clients, who are like, I'm webinared out. Like, it's like all of a sudden, and I know we're having a conversation, you better stay with us, guys. But seriously, it's like all of a sudden we took all that busyness and just put it right online. It's like, wait a minute, there's something else here. And it doesn't mean you have to stop and do nothing unless that's what's calling for you right now. That's perfect. There's productivity in stillness. There's movement in being. And we have to know that and feel that, because this is a threshold that we're invited into that we cannot ignore and we cannot distract ourselves away from. This intelligence is us telling ourselves to remember who you are.
It's interesting. The word for holy in Hebrew literally means to separate. That you take a moment and you separate it from the rest of the moments. And if you feel, and I have to be in agreement, it's a reluctant agreement, but I have to agree that we have invited this because we needed a certain Sabbath. I've been calling this a forced Sabbath with my family, right? And it's true. As soon as it happened, it was, how do we, this is what was going through the administrative mind of the community, was how do we continue to maintain community? Because unless you're a community that thrives on those moments of stillness and soulful reflection and pause, right? That there is there. If you're a community that understands, then that translates perfectly to the online world, because there's really not much more than you need than an invitation. And what I find happening online now, or at least what I see coming up, the moments that I'm able to scroll, is that there are continuous invitations to this, as you say, this pause. And in that pause, two things happen for us. Number one, there's a restoration. There is a creative restoration. That creation can't really happen, and I mean ongoing creativity can't happen unless there is that pause. There were research studies done where they actually measured brainwave activity, uh, and they were giving people exercises to do coherent exercises to sort of measure the activity of the brain during the exercise. And they, just by mistake, this research, and I think it was probably done at Stanford because all these things are done at Stanford. So in the middle of the research, they noticed by mistake that between the exercises that they were giving the study volunteers, that in the in-between, there was a higher brain activity. It was as though their brains, the neurons looked like line of the New York sky, as opposed to when they were trying to get everything.
Mark, you're totally paused. I don't know if you can,
Oh,
but we got you. We got you.
yeah, yeah.
Talking about, speaking on behalf of myself and everybody listening, by the way, we got you.
Right. So where did I leave? Where did I leave off?
No, just that this activity that was happening in the in between when we are at
Right.
rest, we are
Yes.
activity explodes. Absolutely.
Yes, it was the in-between activity that they found in that spot where we didn't try so hard, where we sort of where we allowed instead of making it happen, we allowed it to happen.
I mean, Einstein got his best ideas when he would go for the walk, right?
Right.
Dr. Emmett Brown was on the toilet, the flux capacitor. Right? No, yes, it's all right there. It's all right there. And that doesn't, and but let's also say one more thing about this, which is it doesn't, pausing and having this soulful reflection and being present to what's here and all the intimacy, everything we've been talking about, that feels so incredibly important right now, doesn't have to be a pendulum swing. I want to say this because sometimes it's like I'm super, super busy or I'm completely stopped. And it has to be this like duality or this polarization of it. I think what we're talking about mostly, and sometimes the physical actual slowing down and actually doing nothing is what brings us into the essence of what that pause feels like, which is really about being deeply present with ourselves. We can be deeply present with ourselves in motion. What does it feel like to be so deeply connected with who I am in my active movement?
That's it right there. When I connect with who I am, see, I don't know if this was your experience. I spent the better part of 2.5 years in a yoga ashram, doing nothing but studying the subtle mechanics of stress management, right? Which just meant that I went to Vipassana retreats and satsang every night and chanted and spent 8 hours in yoga classes. And that right there, it was important for me to do that in a very concentrated way.
Yes.
Yet my life does not reflect that now at all. At all. I've got kids. I've got responsibilities. I have thousands. Well, I have different hats that I'm wearing and pulled in many different directions. And I find that even on the Sabbath, I'll say
that last thing again.
So I said that even on the Sabbath at times, as a cleric, as a rabbi, I'm not resting because that's the time that I'm working. So I have to, find my rest in between. So what I've come to is, and this is funny that you said that when you know yourself, I had to come to know myself and redefine the kavanah, the intention behind what I was doing, and insert with great deliberation into each activity a sense of presence and tranquility, even in the moments that are not entirely tranquil. And you know how I do that? Again, this is I don't know, it's my own personal thing. I become childishly irreverent. Like the more childish I am, and when you see like that mischievous glint in the eye.
Oh, I know it well.
So that's when I'm reminding myself that I've moved into the I moved too far over into the fast lane. We call it the Sitra Achra. I moved too far into the fast lane, and that child, that irreverence, that sweetness, um, is
Mark,
the,
wait. Say that last part again. Yeah.
that childish nature is what encourages me to redefine who I am in the moment and access that level of real tranquility, even while I'm going, 600 miles an hour. And that wasn't easy for me. And it took a long time to reconcile that because I felt that I needed to be, either prostrating or in lotus position to really find that. And I love the fact that you said, as long as to know yourself is really to know the divine, and
Yes,
in
yes.
that divinity, you begin to slow down and center, and that's important. So thank you for that awareness.
Yes, and thank you too. I mean, and that is what it is, Mark. It is this, you know, when we become deeply present, we get that who we are is that awareness, right? Who we are is that we're like this deep held space. Like we notice things in a different way. And I think the redefining right now is a really important piece that you just brought in. Like redefining what we take for granted. We have ideas, we have attachment to concepts, we have so many things. When we reconnect to that deeper space of awareness, um, we can see things in a new way, right? It can really shift things for us. So that presence and that level of awareness, and then what happens from that space when we become deeply connected to ourselves and we know ourselves and we can bring that essence into our movement, it becomes an activation of our will, right? It becomes the action that we take that's aligned with who we know we are, which allows us to live our lives in a really different way. I think a lot of people are on automatic, and definitely this experience is uprooting our daily routines and our habits. Things are being totally uprooted right now, which is an awesome opportunity for us to ask ourselves, is that how we really want to live? Is this really an extension of who I am? Right? Are the actions and the busyness that I do they come from myself, my deeper sense of self, that awareness space, right? When we become deeply present. Or is it just something that I'm doing or something that I'm supposed to be doing, right? Or I should be doing? Like we get an opportunity right now. What an amazing gift to ask ourselves these deeper questions about how do we really want to show up in this world, right? Where do I feel most alive? What does it mean to live a life that is alive? Am I living that life? Have I been living that life? There's so much here for us right now when we talk about what is our work now. Part of it is this, it's about going into this deeper space of presence to know who we are and what brings us to life at the optimum satisfaction of our entire being. What does that look like? How can we experience that in the way that we live? Can you imagine people of this world, living from a space that is an extension of who they are deeply, right? And not this conditioned idea of how we're supposed to show up in the world. There's just a
Do you
lot of
think that the
automatic
people
here.
Do you think that as people begin to return to work and return to their whatever mundane activity or activity in general, that they will bring this new perceptual expansiveness, that they'll bring this new recognition, this redefined self? And how can we encourage, if in fact the work is perceptual expansion, how can we encourage this new expanded self, or the wider self, as William James says, uh, to back to where they were before? Because a lot of people, will be returning, God willing, to whatever they were doing, and taking on those roles again. And so, how will this forced Sabbath, right, enhance that return, that reintegration? What will they reintegrate from this? There's something whenever a Sabbath break at the end of the week, we perform some last ritual. It's called Havdalah, which really, it means to separate, but it also means to bring in that which you've gained, right? That which you fostered over that Sabbath break into the rest of the week. And I think one of the what you're saying here, in other words, is our work is to integrate that new sense of self into what you will be doing. If you change, you change. If you don't, bring something that has changed within you to what you're doing.
100%. That's exactly it. You know, it doesn't, it can look like anything. And there's no way to answer this for each individual person. Talk about intimacy, right? This is a deeply intimate question. You know, what what is this moment? What is shifting? Here's a question for everybody that's listening right now, for us too. You know, what is shifting in us in this moment? I know personally I've been experiencing things. I can imagine we are all experiencing something on some levels. There is something shifting within us. And it doesn't mean that like this, the whole world is going to change. Like that's not, you know, on a realistic level, that's not really what we're seeing. But what we are seeing is the beginnings of this. And what we do with it is the big question right now, right? Do we continue the inquiry? Even if, let's say, you know, in a week from now, it was gone, everything went back to normal. I think that we have to be careful with the business as usual mentality. I don't know who really wants to jump back into the world that we just came from, the way that it's been totally. You know what I mean? So, how do we bring these subtle awarenesses and the new information that we're learning personally into our lives in a new way? You know, how do we continue the inquiry and not forget to keep turning toward ourselves, right?
Maybe we can put that out. You want to put that out as a question for
That's a
people?
question, guys. Yeah, for sure.
Let me get online and see if Paulina's here. Come
Yeah,
see.
and you know, some of that is like I'd love to hear like what are some of the subtle things that are moving in you, and also like how do you see bringing this back, you know, into the world right now? How do you imagine is what might change for you on even the tiniest? What's the tiniest little thing that might change? So that's something. And then if you have any questions for us, please, you know, go ahead and put those in the Facebook Live, and we can look at those as well. But this moment is definitely inviting us, you know, to turn toward what's here. Like, how are we participants in this global change? How are each one of us in showing up? You know, this is a moment where creativity gets to flow. If we allow ourselves to become present and open up that channel, we were talking about earlier, you know, when we rest, the creativity flows. So how is that creativity flowing through you right now? What does that look like from you and into your life and into the world? Remember, we're thinking about ourselves and our world, and we're holding all of it simultaneously. That's really important. What new possibilities do we get to step into?
You know, and I'll wait because so far there's no questions here. But in terms of going back to this idea of separation and distance and pause, which have been sort of the keywords of tonight's conversation, I want to thank you for this conversation. It's really, I love speaking with you.
Me too.
You know, I love listening to you. So there are real signs, indications within the creative process that creativity is enhanced by these moments where we step back. You know, they say that there's two ways to look at a painting when you go to any museum. And I learned this in San Francisco, the Museum of Modern Art there, that you first you look at it from up close as the staff will allow you to get to the painting, so you can see the detail. Then you walk back, I think, the length of the painting and maybe another half, so that you get a larger perspective. But then you return to the to that more acute, that closer, that in proximity to the painting, so that you can again investigate the details with that larger expanded sense of perception. And in the creative process, there are many artists who have left of creative pressure and have found the deepest and most fulfilling and also most inspiring creative moments by returning only after a pause or a break. And I think that that's encouraging to everyone. You know, that this can be a part of a creative process, that even the act of creation in terms of the divine, that we believe in a divinity that had to take a break. You know, that part of the creative process was also, you know, building into the framework a certain pause. and let this be that pause.
Yeah. You know, I was saying earlier, we were talking about what is that intelligence? That, you know, this idea that evolution happens under the greatest amount of pressure. You know, it's like change. You know, a crisis is a precursor to change. You know, it's an invitation. It's like when we repeat patterns in our lives over and over, right? We repeat patterns. We date the same kind of guy or the same kind of woman, or the, you know, we repeat ourselves and we're like, God, why do I keep getting into this situation? Why do I keep getting into this situation? It's like we repeat patterns until we learn, until we get the lessons, you know? And so here we are as a global community, continuing the business as usual model. And we go and we go and we see this happening and this system falling apart. And then we go and then we get some more feedback on, but we keep going in the same mentality until finally we are forced. Like finally we have to confront ourselves and say, change must happen. We cannot go back to business as usual. We have to find new ways, new emergent ways that honor ourselves and the sacredness of life. You know, remember who we are and live from that space of remembering. And I feel like this is one of those moments. It's a threshold that we can step through. You know, it's like the Joseph Campbell hero journey. Like, for, you know, we're invited, and the hero's like, no, 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 no. Finally, oh, you have to go on the adventure. You have to step through. You have to face yourself. And when you overcome the things that you feel you can't possibly do, your mind, your limitations, when you break through that, you expand in massive ways. And when we come together in community, we magnify the magnificence of our being. You know, and so here we are, like on our individual level, getting an opportunity to expand how we show up in the world. And then as a community, magnifying that. What does change look like now? What does life look like now? What could it look like? Let's re-envision, let's reimagine, you know, what's possible here. We're the ones creating it. You know, so like
You
there's just
know,
so much in there.
this brings up two questions. Firstly, the idea of pattern and deviation from that pattern, and breaking the pattern and redefining the pattern. You know, it reminds me of music in that if you listen to any really good classical piece, you know, Mozart or Beethoven, there's a central melody, right? And then the composition deviates entirely. It spends almost the entire length of the piece deviating from studiously from that melody, and then at the end it teases you a little bit in the middle, and then at the end it comes back. So the reason why I bring that up is because, you know, if you're talking about archetypes and heroes and the hero's journey, the hero and brings the fire. Can you still hear me, or did I
Yeah,
cut out?
that last part broke up. Say that again.
So the hero, the archetypical heroic journey is where the hero goes into where the maze, right?
Yes.
And gets the fire and brings that fire or that element or what have you back to his or her village or society.
Right. There
And
we
so my question to you, Val Silidker, the
go.
warrior goddess of ecology and psychospirituality, in your heroic journey, right? You are the heroine. What is the fire that you bring back to society that will help to reintegrate a new melody, right? Not just the same old melody, and not just the deviation from that melody, but some new song. We say a shir chadash, some new song, an original song. So, what is the fire that you bring here?
You know, it's I think I've already said it. For me, it's about helping us remember who we are. You know, really reconnecting to the mystery within us. That is us. You know, I think that when we hold ourselves in a larger context, we when we recognize that we're part of a story that is so much larger than our own, and yet it's expressed through us, what we, at least for me, what we get is the confidence to be ourselves more powerfully in the world, because we know that what we're living, it's bigger, it's more, it's for more than just us. You know, the way that we live our lives creates a ripple effect into this world in ways that we could never know. You know, we might be at dinner one night, Mark, and then somebody overhears a conversation, you know, and they're like, what's that? And they go and look something up, and they end up at some workshop, and the next thing you know, 10 years later, they write a book that touches a million lives. because they overheard us once. Like, we never know the life we live. So when we reconnect ourselves to the greater essence of who we are and allow that to fuel us for the great work that we need to do as individuals, we create change in the world on massive levels that are, like I said, the seed never sees the flower, but we get to be a seed in this life. And sometimes it's in obvious ways, like Gandhi, and then sometimes it's in subtle ways, just like being an amazing parent, or an amazing friend or lover, and like how that affects people. It's like everything we do and the way we live our lives creates such a massive effect in the world. And so my boon is helping us remember who we are so we can live that life fully. Because that's how we create massive transformation and lead our world forward, evolutionarily speaking. We need to, we're meant to know ourselves. That's why we have this built-in crazy insatiable appetite for curiosity as humans. So
Beautiful.
that's it. What about you?
What about me? For me, I see life as as one grand musical piece. You know, the music is big for me, and when you're talking, if I'm talking to you and I pause, which I do a lot, um, it's I'm pausing because I'm gathering my thoughts, or I'm trying to find a way to speak intelligently and relay my message intelligently. And they're not very meaningful. The pauses, they're more functional. But the pause in music, if I'm playing you a song, if I'm singing you a sonnet, right? If I'm singing, if I wrote you a piece and I pause in the middle of that piece, it's always and only for effect. It's because that pause is intentional. And so when I see a pause like this, when we're a part of such a dramatic, impactful, frightening, and it's harrowing on many levels. This pause for everyone. I always try to pause back to the music so that while we continue the song, right, while we continue the piece,
Mm-hmm.
people are so um, softened by the music that the coarse, hard nature of reality is modified. And I feel that's my role. My role is to sweeten and to soften. And even if it means, to be the trickster every once in a while, to do so, the hero is also the trickster and the sage. So a part trickster, part sage, part joker. The truth is that's the fire within me. The fire within me
Mm-hmm.
is the fire that melts stone. To borrow a phrase from Yirmiyahu, from Jeremiah, is that my fire, it's I like to bring the fire that melts the hearts of those that whose hearts have been hardened,
Yeah.
and through loss, and through disappointment, and through dramatic change, many hearts have been hardened. So that's my work.
Mm-hmm.
That's my
Memento.
work. It's right,
Beautiful.
right, sweet, right? So there's some questions here. What was the question you had before
It
from
was
Renee?
Renee, but I lost.
Okay, we had a question, we lost it. So Renee, if you can, Robin Wakefield said, I believe that you cannot force creativity. So is this pause and self-reflection, in your opinions, a chance to work ourselves through the creative challenge? For example, we've written half a play. Is this the time to allow the second half to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a question by Robin Wakefield.
Mm.
Do you want to answer that, Val?
I feel like, thank you, Robin, first of all. And interesting, I'm going to pick up on the sacred fire, that we have inside of us all of this burning, beautiful, sacred fire that wants to be expressed. And sometimes we get in our own way from allowing it to burn as brightly as it can inside of us. Um, Creativity is a birthright. It's what we are. The fabric of the universe is creativity. Everything is creativity. And it can look like a million different things. It can look like anything. It could be just the way we walk. It could be the way we listen. You know, it could be the ideas or the fun things we do with our children. Like it can look like so much, you know. And so if it's literal, like writing something and then I'm feeling stagnated, or if it's you know, something like that, I would just say like breathe into what it could feel like to be creative in a many different ways. Just what does it feel like? What does creativity feel like? You know, what does it look like? What is it? How does it move in me? I do feel like this is a moment that is inviting us into creativity, all of us on some level. I really believe that. Um, but I mean, look, there's creativity in like how people are pivoting their business and like all that, like on one level. But then there's like this deeper, the essence of creativity and how it's inviting us to consider our lives and our relationship to how we're being in the world. And that's creative too. Like, how do I want to create my life? How do I want to show up right now? We always get to choose. You know, so if we know that creativity is the fabric of our being and we all have access to it, what does it look like to just kind of breathe into that and see how it wants to flow through us and into our lives? Not necessarily into a project, but that might be as well. But just what does it look like on every level? You know, so those are my first thoughts. Maybe you want to pick up on that and then we can riff.
I'll riff a little bit, little bit. So, you know, we say in our liturgy, "Hamachadesh b'tuva b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereshit," that creation is happening in every moment. That part of the creation doesn't just happen. And Robin, to answer your question and to address this idea, is that creation is not something that we sit down to do. We don't just sit down to create. That creation is happening through us, as you alluded to, and that it is renewed. That creative process is renewed every day. It's and you know, it's funny that you speak. Robin was speaking about the second chapter of a play, which is really quite philosophical, right? Because the whole idea of the episode or the framework of life is that if we can interpret dream, if we can interpret something that happens, you know, on in the news, if we can, if there's a commentary to everything, then there's also a commentary to the moment. That I can step outside of the moment and have a fresh perspective. Part of what it means to be. Hold on, my wife is playing around with this. Part of what it means to have an expanded perception is to step outside of the episode. Otherwise, we shrink to the size of that particular episode. So in the creative process, it's the same. Even in the larger institutional creative process, that as soon as, you know, our experts and expertise is only as good as the mastery of that particular expertise. And if we are narrowed by even our expertise and our institutions, then we have limited the creative process in that. So my invitation is that creativity is not something that we sit down to evoke, that it is happening through us always. So keep your phone or your pad and your pencil with you always. And number two is to recognize that it's, you know, the most creative plays. I'll tell you this only because I read a little something on the success of Broadway plays and playwrights, that if you want to really be successful in any conversation, in any forum, on any board, and especially when you're writing a play, is to bring in people that you wouldn't normally work with. That, you know, the worst plays on Broadway were done by people who are comfortable working with each other. Everyone from Gershwin to Sondheim. As a matter of fact, Sondheim came in to write a play with a bunch of old croonies who were really, you know, they were getting so used to each other that their work was stale, that they had to invite in someone from outside to get things juiced up. And we won't do this because it is uncomfortable. And so this speaks to the idea that what is uncomfortable is really, as Val said, that crisis is integral to the creative process. So if you're not inviting into that conversation, to that dialogue, those ideas and those people and those situations that make us uncomfortable, then that you're stifling the creative process. So there are a few ways in which we evoke creativity. That certainly is one of them. And the pandemic and our current status can also offer, there's so many, this makes us uncomfortable in so many ways that it also makes us creative and certainly more aware in so many important ways.
Yeah. Yes, well said. And I would also say, like, one of the most important things right now for all of us, when we talk about the work that we have to do, and even um, allowing the creativity to flow through in this crisis, is to really allow ourselves to be present to, and we didn't really touch on this too much, but I feel it's important to mention, to be really present to our emotional space right now. And whatever it is that we're feeling, there's great power in being present to the truth of our experience. And right now we're holding so much. We're holding so much. You know, we're feeling not only our own personal relationship to uncertainty or our job situation or like whatever our individual situations may be, but we are also, whether we're aware of it or not, and I think most of us at this point are, we're really holding the pain of our world, the intense amount of suffering that's happening, the loss of lives, the confusion, the not knowing what's going to happen next. Like there's a lot of that that's present with us too. And I think that we live in a world that teaches us. So we talked about distraction. So on one level, it's like we're laden with distractions, everything that can pull us outside of ourselves. But on another level, we're actually taught not to feel certain feelings because they're not good or they're negative feelings, right? Like if you're sad, you need to be happy, right? If there's some kind of fear, no, you need to to let go of that fear, right? Let's dissolve that fear. Let me show you how, right? There's all everyone's talking about, like, don't feel fear, don't feel sadness, let's be happy all the time, like this kind of thing. So here we are confronted with massive grief on a level like that maybe we've never experienced before. It's so thick and tangible. And how do we hold that when it's not what we're used to? And so there's something here, it kind of weaves in a lot of the things we were talking about, the intimacy factor, all of it is here. What is it like to turn toward and be with everything that we're feeling right now in a very honest way, and allow that to be part of the experience that breaks our hearts open to compassion for ourselves, compassion for others, for what's really truthfully, what's really meaningful to us in this world, and what's on the other side of those emotions. It's like we only grieve for what we love. So if you're feeling grief in any possible way right now, ask yourself what it is that you love so dearly that's evoking grief in you. Is it our love for life, our love for the world, our love for people to be healthy and at peace? Like there's something deeper happening inside of all of us right now, and we only get the goods, we only get to the gold when we go through the experience of our emotions. And so it's very important for us to be present, not overwhelmed or paralyzed, just present, observing, noticing, feeling and noticing that we're feeling at the same time, and really holding ourselves like a parent to a child and saying, it's okay. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel, afraid of what's next, because even in speaking my fear, I'm evoking my courage to walk with it,
Mm.
right? It's all part of the same thing. And so something that feels very important in our work right now is to be real with what we feel and to know that we're in this together. We're not alone in this experience, in this expression, and going through that also is an invitation into our creativity in the moment, into our transmutation of those emotions into the empowered action, the active hope that we're able to step into right now.
I love it. I want to read you some of the comments. Pam Kellner says, we are shifting, and I wonder also if we can hold this wonderful awareness, which I think we've addressed. Ellen Kamen said, as the world takes a pause due to the pandemic and so many are suffering, our environment is healing in so many ways. The air is clear, animals, sea life, and plants are thriving. Bill Miller says, make more time for people, old friends who I've neglected in my life. That's certainly one shift. Oh, it's nice. He said, Mark, you're one of those people. That's sweet. Victoria, this is lasting long enough for new patterns to develop and new habits to form. Oh, I love that. I'm
Yeah.
developing a love of being quiet and being by myself. No matter what happens, I'll never lose that. Uh, that's beautiful,
And I want to say to that, I've been hearing so much of that from
right?
the people I've been in conversation with and experiencing it myself. Like, I just learned how to skateboard. No, I'm kidding. But no, I'm not kidding, actually. I
Did
am
you learn how to skateboard? Because we can skateboard together now.
going skating. Oh, I'm very excited. No, but yes, this is that
I've
intimacy.
been I've been waiting for you to develop that habit.
I finally developed this habit. So we had a date. But that is so beautiful. So thank you for expressing that, because that is so, so important that we develop pattern. I mean, that's what the Feast for the Soul, 40 days of meditation and mindfulness to create new patterns. This is it, guys. Like the consistency. There's a gift in the length of time, right? That we're in this space right now. So how do we utilize that to create new patterns in our lives consciously? Because we go on automatic and live in a lot of unconscious ways. So what does it mean to take this experience and create new conscious patterns that are deliciously serving to our world and to us? So love that so much.
One more comment, and I want to thank Renee Green for posting these comments, because she actually is texting me all the pictures of all the comments, so I don't miss any. Pam says, part of the intelligence for me is that in facing so much uncertainty, that I'm living more in the present moment and feeling gratitude for all the little things that I took for granted. The saying I've heard is that when we can't go outside, we go inside. The connections we're making as a worldwide community have never happened before in this way. My hope is that the shift we experience is to focus on our similarities, not our differences. The pandemic has shown that we're all made from the same cloth, because this COVID-19 doesn't discriminate. Let this be the beginning of unity amongst all. I love that prayer. Beautiful prayer.
So beautiful. Yeah, I would love to, like, it's like put together the gifts that we are receiving right now. Like that beautiful Rumi poem. I've been doing some poetry on YouTube, lately, and speaking to it. And one of them is that the poem by Rumi, don't go back to sleep. Don't go back to sleep, and that is such an important thing to keep in our hearts right now. We're awakening to all of these beautiful things that we've been talking about, that that you all have been sharing in your comments, and this is that moment to stay awake to what's here and be in the curiosity of it, be in the connection of it, and really recognize the gifts, and also, we're holding the pain of our world. We are also holding the blessings of this moment and what they have to teach us. So let us not be in vain, this experience, but let's really take this to heart and learn how to live in a way that, just opens us to each other more deeply than ever. That's here.
Val, my sweet holy sister, I want to thank you for enlightening us and illuminating this night. You're just such a joy to be around, and I mean that literally and figuratively. And if friends, if you would like to, you want to see more of these kinds of conversations between Val and myself, please let us know, and we'll try to do them, in the future. This was a real treat. I love you so much. Give my love to your family. I know we have some announcements. Are there any announcements you'd like to make about some upcoming events in your community?
I can say I have two things that are coming up just in general. So I am the co-founder and director of Psycho-Spiritual Institute, and we have a program coming up in September for anybody who might feel called. It's a 9-month board-certified coach training and leadership program in the spiritual psychology of psychosynthesis, which is this very profound work that invites us into psychological and spiritual wholeness. And it's a personal journey, as well as learning how to facilitate and hold space for individuals and groups, and leadership skills, for the new paradigm leadership skills. So that's one thing. And then that starts in September. More immediately, though, I'm putting together a workshop through Unity on the Bay that's called Deep Resilience. And it's going to be 4 weeks long, starting in about 3 to 4 weeks. We're just getting the date set right now, so that'll be out and available in the next 2 or 3 days, I believe. But it's gonna start in about 3 or 4 weeks. It's gonna be 4 weeks on a Tuesday night, 2 hours each night. And we're gonna be just diving into some really powerful work around all of this, being really, present to this moment, gratitude, and our honoring our pain for the world, our deep, reframes and perceptions, and also the work, our sacred work that we're all called to be doing. So it's going to be a really profound journey. So I'll put that out there as well.
Thank you, thank you. And I want to invite friends who are new to us on Facebook Live to join us every Wednesday and Friday night. Wednesday we have a class in spirituality and Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah and whatever the talk of the day is. And we also have services on Friday night that are really very soulful and warm and joyful and very, very musical. So please join my family and I from our living room here, where we continue to create community online. I also have some news for you. We're going to be starting programming on Shabbos with Dr. Lisa Sirota Weiner on Saturday mornings, I believe, and also Stephen Snyder, who will be teaching, and hopefully we'll get some of our musicians back once we do this shared screen, so that the musicians can also be a part of that Saturday event. And we have Sunday events on the way as well, Sunday evening events around 5 o'clock, one of which is the Chesed Visit, where people in the community who really feel the need just to reach out and to be reached out to can be involved in a Zoom meeting. And also Ann Goldberg will be doing interviews with some of the community members so that we can get to know each other and develop intimacy there with some of the people that you might not know and get to know more about their lives. And then I believe that Stephen Weisberg is also going to be coming up with a Book of Life series, which is once a month on a Sunday. So we'll continue to create programming that enhances community and creates stronghold here, because we love, as Val and I were discussing even before we came on together, the community really is the lifeblood of intimacy and internal and an external security of the soul. And so we thank you for lending us your souls this evening, and for being a part of all the soulful experiences that we have together. Val, one more time, I love you.
I love you.
I love you.
Yeah, it's all there.